Say that if a fire should start and you don't like the event, there's an exit here into the back lane and there's one here where you came in. So that's the first important part of the business. Our chair tonight is Catherine Connolly. Those of you who observed the last general election will remember Catherine went within a whisker of being elected a TD. We're delighted to have her here this evening. She's a councillor in Galway, and she'd like to open the proceedings by saying a few words. And it's over to you.
Díomh Corja agus fáilte róh an seo an agus céad míle fáilte don speisialta Fred Magdoff. Tá sé thar bheith táhachtach go háirí a faoi láthair go bhfuil muid an fís eile a chur chun cín sa tír seo agus a chur anúil don rialtas go háirithe go bhfuil gachanna eile sa tír seo agus go bhfuil cuí eile chun dul I deangháil le na feibanna atá agathe. Friends, you're very welcome here tonight, and a very special welcome to you, and particularly to our first guest speaker, Fred. You're very, very welcome. I have to say I'm delighted to be here, and indeed feel privileged to have the opportunity to chair the opening session of the 23rd Desmond Greaves Weekend School. It's my first time here. The invitation has allowed me to rediscover and find inspiration in the wonderful man that Desmond Greaves was, and the lasting legacy that he has given us, and also, of course, to discover the works of our first speaker, Professor Fred Magdoff, something I will return to shortly. We are currently, as we are only too well aware of, living in a country where one could all too easily despair and give up. A country where language has been turned on its head at every level of our administration, and where essentially, in my view, language is used to deceive, deflect, disconnect, divide and deflate us. From John Burton's classic comment that those on social welfare have made a lifestyle choice, to Eamon Gilmore's response, the recent response, and quoted in Fintan O'Toole's recent article on Shannon, that the government has in the past sought and received assurances from the US authorities, and apologies Fred, but we've received assurances from the US authorities, and we have no reason to doubt those assurances. To Pat Rabbitt's debacle on the recent Vincent Brown show as Minister for our Natural Resources, to the Taoiseach and Alan Chatter's forceful talking about child protection and the mock battle with the Vatican, while simultaneously endangering those very children they seek to protect by withdrawing services on the ground. I live in a city where one-third of the public health nurse are vacant, one-third. We have 4 doctors for the size of Galway, and there are no child development clinics at a time when he's having a mock battle with the Vatican. But to despair and give up is a luxury we on the left can ill afford. But even more importantly, to despair would be to let down the very man we are here to celebrate and commemorate. A man, and I thank Anthony Coughlin, who's here tonight, for this information and for his wonderful obituary on this man, which I read. A man whose decision to devote himself to full-time politics constituted the mature second choice, which he used to say himself, that all revolutionaries had to make if they were to sustain throughout their lives the commitment first entered into in the idealism of youth. It would also be a luxury to despair and to give up on the wonderful people's movement, a movement that has kept me going in moments of despair over the last number of years, and who have organised this weekend to give us all the opportunity to listen, to reflect, and to discuss other options and other ways. And indeed, to despair would be to let down the wonderful array of speakers, beginning with Fred here tonight, who have been invited and to spend the weekend with us, and all those people out there who know there is a different way to do things in this country. We are also, of course, in a country where we are told ad nauseum that the experts know best. Those experts who never saw the crisis coming or said it wasn't coming. Those experts who told us we, ordinary people, couldn't possibly understand the complex nature of the markets or economics. And those people who elevated the economy to the level of a god. The experts that allowed the situation to develop and indeed thrive where banks were throwing money at developers. The experts And in my opinion, the most important aspect for me, the experts who seek to deflate any sense of confidence that we might have in ourselves to analyse and sort out our economic woes in a way which puts our society first and places the economy as it should be, as a servant to that society. Indeed, my most recent experience of the type of language and the distortion of language was listening to Morning Ireland and John Fitzgerald, the guru from the RSI, who told us that we were all doing very well now, and that the government just needed to spell out in more detail the level of cutbacks, and indeed to have more cutbacks. And during the same interview, or shortly afterwards, we heard a quote from the Financial Times telling us that the EU and the euro were in very serious difficulty. And indeed today the markets have plummeted because, surprise, surprise, somebody in the European Central Bank, a top economist, has a conflict of interest in relation to the sale of bonds. Given the blatant misuse of language and the deliberate obfuscation by our politicians and experts, it was with, I have to say, bemusement and really joy that I read and discovered Fred Magdoff, a man who was Professor of Plant and Soil Science at the University of Vermont, Burlington, and currently an emeritus professor there, a man who has written and co-authored so many books on a diverse range of topics, including being a current director of a monthly review that my mind boggles. But most of all, a man and an author who has been rightly praised for the clarity of his writing in a world where language has been obfuscated. And indeed, the clarity of his writing is reflected in the number of titles of his book. The first one, you mightn't think so, the development of soil clogging in sands leached with septic tank effluent. However, it's particularly relevant to the area I come from, in the west of Ireland and Connemara, where the current government are bringing in, under the auspices of recording septic tanks, a €300 charge, which is letting go under pressure. There are a number of other books. His latest one is up here, What Every Man, I think, or everybody.
Every environmentalist.
Oh, very good, needs to know about capitalism. The one that I have looked at and read is the ABC of the economic crisis. I can't think of a simpler book, or a book with more clarity. And indeed, the review I read on it said that it's needed and an extremely clear guide to the economic crisis. Another review of the ABC book said, rich, powerful, highly educated people created the crisis 2008 to 2009, while hundreds of millions suffered the consequences. Lost homes, jobs, rising insecurity, and falling living standards. And I'm going to end by just quoting a little bit of his work, but the clarity of it is wonderful for me, who despairs of what is happening to our language. On page 10, he tells us, although a significant portion of the world's population, perhaps 20 to 30%, live at a very high standard of living, even for them it is a dead-end system, hell-bent on trivialising our lives and destroying the planet. I'm just picking 4 or 5 quotes that struck me. On page 16, he tells us, in America currently, 32.2 million persons are in receipt of food stamps. The greatest economy in the world that Mary Harnley wanted us to follow. On page 20, if there was ever a time when the emperor had no clothes, it is now. What are we to do in such circumstances? Was it all a big accident? Were evil men and women conspiring to ruin the economy while they enriched themselves? Was it Bush's fault? Clinton's? Greenspan's? Here are some good starting suggestions for those of you who want to find out. Ignore what you see on television. Don't listen to or read the commentaries of mainstream economists. Hide your wallets when bankers or Wall Street bigwigs put forth their 2 cents. And assume that when government spokespersons are at the podium, that they are either lying or ignorant of the truth. And most importantly, read on. They're just some of the quotes. And the final one. Indeed, no society can survive if the only economic activity, or even the dominant activity, is lending and borrowing money. It is with great pleasure that I introduce tonight's speaker on the first session of this very, very special weekend. And I think we should give him a very good Irish welcome. It's his first time in Ireland. You're very welcome.
I'm going to be speaking from down here because I have some slides to show you, and I'll be using them.